At dawn in the Mala Mala Game Reserve, the soft golden rays of the sun shine over the vast grasslands, where a group of lions rests after another night of hunting. But this is no ordinary alliance. These 6 warriors would write their names in savannah history in a way no one could have predicted. Here begins the legend of the Mapogo. Makulu, the oldest of the coalition, faced a cruel fate early on. At only 20 months old, he was forced to wander alone without the protection of his pride. For such a young lion, survival seemed impossible, but destiny had something greater in store for him. Found by the powerful West Street Lions, he was not only accepted but began to forge the fierce spirit that would define the Mapogo legacy. On a hot afternoon, surrounded by his new companions, Makulu watched in silence. Among those dominant males, he was still a newcomer, but no one knew that years later, he would become part of the most feared coalition Africa had ever seen. Every step he took was a prelude to the chaos that was to come. Over time, Makulu was no longer alone. 5 other young lions, Kinky Tail, Mr. T, Rasta, Scar and Pretty Boy, joined him. Together, they made the decision that would change everything, to leave the airstrip pride and head into the unknown. Without knowing it, they were about to defy the rules of nature and transform the way lions dominated territories. But being a large coalition wasn't a guarantee of power. They would need to prove they deserved every piece of land they conquered. Every hunt, every battle, and every rival eliminated solidified their rise. What began as a group of ambitious young lions would soon become an empire of terror, where no lion was safe. And so, the Mapogo began their journey. But how far would they go to maintain their dominance? Who would dare to face them? And in the end, what would be the price of their reign? These are the questions that would define the trajectory of this legendary coalition. The Mapogo emerged in Mala Mala as 6 young lions who already showed signs of something great. Makulu, the largest of them, led the group alongside Kinky Tail, a fierce warrior, and Mr. T, the most relentless of the coalition. Beside them were Rasta, Scar, and Pretty Boy, each playing a crucial role. They weren't born together, but they chose to face destiny side by side. In a world where few males survive alone, they made the decision that would change everything, to abandon their birth pride and form a unique alliance. Leaving a birth pride is not a simple choice. Typically, young lions are kicked out and condemned to wander until they find a new home, if they manage to survive. But the Mapogo had another idea. Together, they would not just wander but conquer. Amidst the vast plains of Sabi Sands, they began to hone their skills, hunting and defending themselves against rivals. This union gave them something few males possessed: strength in numbers. With 6 members, they represented an extraordinary coalition, something that would forever change the dynamics of lions in the region. While other young lions faced loneliness and the risks of surviving alone, the Mapogo created a new rule. They hunted together, slept together, and protected each other like brothers. The presence of so many males in a single group was, in itself, a rare phenomenon. But what truly set them apart was the brutality with which they eliminated threats. From an early age, they learned that hesitation meant weakness, and weakness meant death. If they wanted to reign, they couldn't afford any mistakes. The first signs of their dominance emerged quickly. Other males in the region felt the change in the air, a threat that no one could stop. The lion hierarchy was about to be rewritten, and the Mapogo were the authors of this new story. Every step they took through the Mala Mala territory was a silent warning to those who dared to challenge them. But they were still just youngsters learning to hunt and fight. The true test of survival was yet to come. It was a matter of time before they faced greater challenges. The stronger they became, the more enemies appeared. The wild world of Sabi Sands did not forgive mistakes, and any sign of weakness meant certain death. However, the Mapogo were far from easy prey. They had already proven that unity was their greatest weapon. But would this alliance alone be enough to guarantee dominance over such vast territories? From early on, the Mapogo faced challenges that tested their resilience and intelligence. Survival in the savannah was not guaranteed, not even for such a powerful coalition. Facing Cape buffalo, angry elephants, and even packs of hyenas required more than brute force. It required strategy. Makulu, the oldest, led the hunts, while Kinky Tail and Mr. T took the front lines, attacking their prey with ferocious aggression. Each victory strengthened the coalition, shaping them into the top predators of Sabi Sands. Hunger was a constant enemy. Unlike a traditional pride which relies on the females to hunt, the Mapogo needed to secure their own meals. This led them to develop a ruthless technique. They hunted not just to eat, but to dominate. They attacked hippos, giraffes, and even other lions that ventured into their territory. Their brutality soon became legendary, with reports that they eliminated anyone who crossed their path, including cubs of rival coalitions. But nature always presents new challenges. During the dry season, the scarcity of prey forced them to go beyond their domain, testing their ability to adapt. What would be a death sentence for other males? For the Mapogo was just another training ground. They learned to communicate without making a sound, surrounding buffalo before they noticed the trap. Their cooperation was so precise that, in a matter of seconds, a gigantic animal was down, surrendered to the force of the coalition. Even among brothers, the hierarchy needed to be established. Internal fights were inevitable, but essential to maintain order within the group. Mr. T, known for his ruthless nature, was already beginning to challenge Makulu, making it clear that absolute power was at stake. Kinky Tail, always at Mr. T's side, also proved to be a fearless warrior. The tension grew each day, but for now they were still a unit. The Mapogo were ready for the next step, the conquest of territory. Up to that point they had survived, hunted and strengthened their bond, but they still didn't have a fixed home. Instinct pushed them forward, in search of females and a pride to call their own. And so, guided by the desire for domination, they set off into the unknown, where they would encounter even greater challenges and battles that would mark them forever. In 2006, the Mapogo finally crossed the border into a new territory. The objective was clear, to take a pride of females for themselves and consolidate their dominance. Along the way, they encountered a group of male lions protecting a pride of lionesses and cubs. For anyone else, this would be a risky battle. But for the Mapogo, just another obstacle. Without hesitation, they attacked, dividing into two groups to surround their adversaries. The rival males fought to the end, but they were outnumbered and lacked the same cohesion as the Mapogo. One by one, they were eliminated, leaving the pride vulnerable. The females, now without protectors, had no choice. The coalition took control, and with it, came a cruel and inevitable decision. The former leader's cubs were exterminated. This practice, though brutal, was common among dominant lions. The victory marked the beginning of an unprecedented reign. Now, with an established pride and a fertile hunting territory, the Mapogo were at the peak of their power. Mr. T and Kinky Tail became the most aggressive, while Makulu maintained order within the coalition. The lionesses, initially reluctant, soon recognized the strength of the new leaders. Within a few months, the natural cycle began again, and new generations of lions began to emerge under the protection of the Mapogo. But conquering a territory is only half the battle. Maintaining dominance requires even more strength. Other males began lurking around their lands, attracted by the scent of the lionesses and the desire to dethrone the new kings. The Mapogo, however, were ready. Unlike other coalitions, they didn't wait for the attack. They were the ones who went on the offensive. They hunted the invaders before they had a chance to organize, further consolidating their reputation as ruthless rulers of Sabi Sands. By this time, the coalition had already broken the traditional rules. Instead of just being protectors of a single pride, they expanded their domain and ruled multiple groups of lionesses at the same time, something practically unheard of in the wild. Their power seemed unshakable, but nature always takes its toll. Internally, the tension grew. What began as an unbreakable brotherhood would soon become a battlefield, where even the strongest could fall. If there's one unchanging law in the jungle, it's that only the strongest survive. And no one understood this better than Mr. T. His reputation grew with each battle, and his brutality knew no bounds. He didn't just eliminate rivals, he devoured them. His behavior was so extreme that even other members of the Mapogo seemed to hesitate in the face of his fury. In a world where hierarchy defined destiny, Mr. T, his name became synonymous with terror among the lions of the region. In Sabi Sands and Mala Mala, the roars of the Mapogo weren't just warnings, they were death sentences. When a new territory fell under their control, the rule was clear. Any cub that wasn't theirs had to be eliminated. And Mr. T followed this rule to the letter. He attacked the little ones without mercy, ignoring even the pleas of the desperate mothers. For him, there was no room for offspring that didn't carry his blood. This brutal behavior wasn't just instinct, it was strategy. By killing his rivals' cubs, he forced the lionesses into heat faster, ensuring that new offspring would arise under his legacy. It was a cruel, but efficient game. And so his lineage multiplied as the Mapogo territory expanded. The dominance that once seemed unshakable now became a wild empire, where strength was the only law. But this brutality also awakened enemies. Other males began to team up to overthrow the coalition, recognizing that only a combined force could challenge the Mapogos. Among these new rivals, one name started to gain power: Majingilani. They weren't as numerous as the Mapogos in their prime, but they were patient, organized, and deadly. They learned from the mistakes of those who came before, and knew that brute force alone wasn't enough to win. The threat was approaching, but Mr. T saw no reason to change. For him, violence was the solution to any problem. He believed that no coalition could defeat him, and that his brutality was enough to keep any enemy at bay. What he didn't know was that, this time, the jungle had other plans. The tables were about to turn, and the war that would define the future of the Mapogos was about to begin. For years, the Mapogos were an unbeatable machine of domination, but like every great force, their greatest threat didn't come from outside, it came from within. Over time, the balance between the six began to crumble. Makulu, the oldest and most experienced, tried to maintain order, but Mr. T and Kinky Tail were increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. They wouldn't accept sharing power and began to challenge the leadership of their own brothers. What was once an unbreakable alliance now showed signs of weakness. The tension grew with each passing day. Mr. T, known for his brutality, would no longer obey rules that weren't his own. He and Kinky Tail began to act as an independent faction within the coalition, attacking without warning, making decisions without consulting the others. For Makulu and the others, this was unacceptable. In a group where hierarchy meant survival, internal disagreements were dangerous. And when the jungle senses weakness, enemies emerge. The final breaking point came when Mr. T and Kinky Tail decided to abandon their brothers and go off on their own. They believed they could create their own kingdom without having to submit to Makulu's leadership. The problem? The wild world isn't kind to loners. Away from the support of the coalition, the two became easy targets. And while the remaining Mapogos tried to maintain dominance over their territories, Mr. T and Kinky Tail were about to face the biggest challenge of their lives. Separated from their former family, the two wandered in search of a new territory. But the jungle doesn't forgive mistakes, and they soon realized they weren't as invincible as they thought. Other males began to test their strength, and without the backing of their brothers, the battles became more difficult. In one of these fights, Kinky Tail stood out, fighting with a ferocity that lived up to the Mapogo legacy. But not even his brutality was enough to protect them from what was to come. Isolation was taking its toll, and the threat of the Majingilan was getting closer and closer. The new rivals saw the Mapogos' division as a perfect opportunity to attack. Kinky Tail and Mr. T didn't know it yet, but they were walking straight into an ambush that would change the history of the jungle. What happened next would mark the beginning of the fall of one of the greatest coalitions that ever existed. The Mapogos had faced countless challenges, but nothing compared to what was coming. After the separation, Mr. T and Kinky Tail wandered alone, confident that they were still invincible. What they didn't know was that the jungle had already chosen its new predators. The Majingalan coalition, made up of 4 fierce lions, was preparing to take the territory the Mapogos had fought so hard to conquer. Mr. T's reign of terror was numbered. Kinky Tail, always the first to enter combat, didn't hesitate when he saw the Majingalani. What he didn't realize was that he was no longer facing isolated males or unprepared coalitions. The Majingalan were strategic, patient, and relentless. They didn't attack alone. When Kinky Tail charged forward, believing he would win as he always had, he fell right into a trap. In a matter of minutes, he was surrounded, brought down, and brutally slaughtered. Mr. T watched everything from afar, unable to help. For the first time, the lion who spread terror felt the taste of fear. He roared, threatened to attack, but he knew that alone he had no chance against 4 determined enemies. With no choice, he fled, abandoning his brother's body to the Majingalane. It was a deep blow, not just for him, but for the entire Mapogo legacy. If they were once seen as gods of dominance, now they seemed vulnerable, fallible. Kinky Tail's death was the trigger for a new era in the jungle. The Majingalane knew this was just the beginning. They didn't just want to defeat the Mapogos, they wanted to erase them from history. As Mr. T ran for his life, his former brothers were also at risk. The territory they ruled for years was now a target, and the new rivals were determined to seize every inch of land that belonged to the legendary coalition. With the loss of one of their fiercest warriors, the Mapogo coalition finally felt the weight of their decline. Makulu, Scar, Rasta and Pretty Boy were still alive, but they knew their glory days were numbered. What no one knew was that this was just the beginning of a war that would redefine the future of lions in Mala Mala and Sabi Sands. The shadow of the Majingalani was approaching, and the fight for survival had never been so brutal. The Mapogo had already lost Kinky Tail, and the defeat brought a reality they never imagined. Their time was running out. Mr. T, now alone, wandered through the lands that once belonged to the coalition, but he was no longer the same lion. The Majingalan were taking over more and more territory, and the jungle was turning against the former kings. Makulu, Scar, Rasta and Pretty Boy still resisted, but the marks of time and battles were beginning to take their toll. The era of the Mapogo was coming to an end. Mr. T, once feared for his brutality, became a fugitive. But his thirst for dominance hadn't disappeared. In a desperate act, he tried to reclaim a territory, but the Salatis, a new emerging coalition, were waiting for him. The fight was brutal, and for the first time the lion who had spread terror tasted his own medicine. Surrounded and with no chance of escape, Mr. T fell. His body, once a symbol of absolute power, was left as a warning to all who dared challenge the new rulers of the jungle. With the fall of Mr. T, the remaining Mapogo were fragmented. Rasta disappeared without a trace, and no one ever found his body. Scar, in a desperate attempt to escape the violence that had taken hold, ended up killed by human hunters. Pretty Boy and Makulu, the last survivors of the legend, became shadows of their former selves. They no longer fought for territories or females. Now they wandered aimlessly, far from the glory they once knew. The jungle had already chosen its new leaders. The Majingalane consolidated their dominance, and the Mapogo, who for years had reigned with an iron fist, were now just stories told by the winds of Sabi Sands. The circle of life had taken its toll. The same strength that made them unbeatable also condemned them to ruin. The kings fell, and new tyrants took the throne. But a legacy like the Mapogos doesn't disappear so easily. Even with the end of their era, their story would continue to echo through the savannah. Every roar, every battle, every piece of territory conquered still lived in the jungle's memory. And as new lions emerged, trying to make their own mark, one question remained. Would another coalition ever be able to match the legend of the Mapogo? 6 lions, 6 warriors who forever changed the dynamics of the territories of Mala Mala and Sabi Sands. The Mapogo weren't just a coalition, they were a revolution. Before them, lions rarely formed such large groups, and dominance was achieved more gradually. But the Mapogo broke all the rules. With brutality and strategy, they eliminated more than 100 rivals and redrew the balance of power in the savannah. The name Mapogo became synonymous with strength and terror. Their brutal tactics and skill in collective hunting both inspired and frightened. They didn't just survive, they destroyed everything that threatened their hierarchy. Even with the end of their era, their feats are still discussed by safari guides, researchers, and documentary filmmakers. The very concept of a coalition was never seen the same way again. The Mapogo proved that together, lions could dominate absolutely. But their legacy isn't just about brutality. Behind every battle, there was an unbreakable bond between brothers. Even with the separations and tragedies, the Mapogo showed that unity was their greatest strength. Each one had their distinct personality. Makulu, the strategic leader, Kinky Tail, the fearless warrior, Mr. T, the most aggressive and unpredictable, Rasta and Scar, the resilient soldiers, and Pretty Boy, the most discreet but equally lethal. Each played a key role in the group's rise. Even after their fall, the Mapogo DNA still runs in new generations. Some of the cubs that survived their reign grew up to form their own coalitions, carrying traits of their parents' ferocity. The hunting and attack techniques that the Mapogo perfected continue to be seen among lions today. They may have been defeated, but never forgotten. The wild world has never seen a coalition like this again, and maybe it never will. What the Mapogo did went beyond the ordinary, beyond what was expected. They challenged nature, rewrote the rules, and left a trail of legends that will never disappear. But the jungle is unpredictable and the story never ends. The question that remains is, will a new coalition one day emerge capable of matching the reign of the Mapogo? Now that you know the Mapogo's story, you can see that even though they were unbeatable beasts, their journey was marked by intense battles and unexpected twists and turns. The savannah, just like life, is full of surprises, and to stay on top, you need courage, strategy, and, of course, a little bit of luck. With absolute control over the Sabi Sands Reserve, the Mapogo established a legacy that will be remembered for generations. And even with their downfall, the strength and impact of this coalition still echo in the wildlands. Want to learn more about this story of power, conflict, and resilience? Then don't waste any time, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with everything about the greatest predators of the savannah and much more. Are you ready to see what's coming next? Don't miss the next chapter.